Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're looking for a shortcut to being well-informed about the strange places where rigorous 19th century science meets deep occult philosophy, you're at exactly the right place.
You really are.
Today, we are cracking open a true literary and scientific enigma, a book that really confounded the late 19th century and I think still raises some pretty profound questions.
It absolutely does. We're talking about the 1896 book, Etidorhpa, or The End of Earth.
Etidorhpa, which we'll get into the name later. It's a bit of a clue.
It is. And this deep dive is, I think, really necessary because this book is such an extraordinary document. It's not just one thing. It's a spectacular blending of an adventure narrative, like something out of Jules Verne, but also dense occult philosophy, and then these wild scientific speculations about everything from gravity to volcanism.
And even the hollow earth concept.
Right. So our mission here is really to unpack this complex narrative, get into the surprising facts, and, hopefully keep you hooked as we show how it managed to be both a precise scientific treatise and this daring piece of esoteric literature.
Okay, so the context here is absolutely vital. I mean, if this were written by some fringe theorist scribbling away in an attic, we could probably just dismiss it.
Sure, it'd be easy to.
But the author was John Drury Lloyd, J.U.L. And he was a distinguished Cincinnati chemist and pharmacologist. This wasn't a side project by a mystic. This was a recognized authoritative scientist.
A man with a massive reputation.
And he was daring to publish something that risked that entire reputation.
And that reputation was, well, it was huge. Lloyd's credentials were just unimpeachable. He wasn't just some local figure. He was an internationally respected pharmaceutical botanist. For example, you have to understand, he amassed one of the world's most famous botanical and pharmaceutical libraries right there in Cincinnati.
That's amazing.
And our sources confirm this collection was so vast and specialized that it attracted academic superstars. I mean, there's this one story of a highly respected professor emeritus from the University of Strasbourg, a pharmacologist and chemist who had dedicated almost 80 years of his life to study.
Wow, 80 years.
He traveled all the way to the U.S. specifically to use Lloyd's library. That's the level we're talking about.
That detail really lands the gravitas of the author, doesn't it? Lloyd was a man who understood the hard empirical limits of science. He was, as he put it, firmly stuck to the crucible.
Yeah, he knew his chemistry.
Yet he deliberately stepped outside those restricted confines of what we'd call materialistic science to explore these really esoteric concepts.
And he absolutely knew the professional risk he was taking. He included these notes in the preface, and they're essentially an apology to his colleagues for what they were about to read.
He apologized.
He did. We know he apologized up front for bothering his friends with problems that seemed to have no relevance to men in his position. He knew he was risking criticism. He knew he was annoying his peers by venturing into what they considered, purely spiritual or just fictional territory.
But the public reception proved he had struck a deep cultural nerve. This wasn't some slow burn cult classic.
Not at all. It was an immediate cultural phenomenon. Think about this. By 1896, Etidorhpa was already in its 6th edition.
6th edition. That's incredible.
It really speaks to a society that was hungry for something that could reconcile the cold, hard facts of science with that yearning for spiritual meaning.
And the critics, even the serious literary critics of the time, they didn't treat it as just trashy, speculative fiction, did they?
No, not at all. They heaped praise on its narrative power. They were comparing its vivid scenes and storytelling to literary giants like Dumas, Jules Verne, Dante, even Victor Hugo.
That's some heavy company.
It is. They called it a singular, original, and thought-provoking new book. It was seen as this work that just defied genre. It had precise science, bold theories, and speculative reasoning all mixed into one. It presented this duality right at its core. The visible, quantifiable world versus the hidden, unquantifiable one.
Okay, but the story's intellectual foundation, it doesn't just rest on Lloyd. It rests on another real-life genius, Professor Daniel Vaughan. He was the enigmatic figure who inspired and, according to Lloyd, actually participated in the narrative.
And it's so crucial to establish that Vaughan was real. Early on, some critics speculated that Daniel Vaughan and John Drury Lloyd were just pseudonyms for some group of mystic creators.
Right, trying to give their philosophy some scientific weight.
Exactly. But the sources confirm Vaughan was a real person and a real, if very eccentric, genius.
And what a genius he was. He was a profound mathematician, an original researcher in chemistry, geology, and astronomy. He was educated at Trinity College, Dublin, which is a serious institution.
Very serious.
And to give you a real measure of his intellectual horsepower, he wasn't just fluent in classical languages. He was so proficient that he read Laplace's monumental work, Celestial Metric, in the original Greek and Latin.
I mean, think about what that requires. Not only do you have to be a master mathematician and astronomer to even begin to understand the concepts,
Right.
but you have to be able to follow the intricate, complex philosophical arguments of Laplace using texts written in dead languages. His mind just operated on a level that very few people ever achieve.
Yet, despite this vast monumental learning, the story of Professor Vaughan it's deeply tragic.
It truly is. His life was marked by extreme poverty, and he died in total obscurity. He was a mind so utterly absorbed in science that he was, as they put it, utterly negligent of himself.
His friends were so concerned about his poverty, and we're talking about a man who often starved and suffered quietly,
Yeah.
that they tried to rally support for him.
They did. They attempted to organize a lecture series and secure him a lifetime annuity so he wouldn't have to worry about material existence anymore.
But tragically, he passed away before they could get it established.
It's an almost perfect literary metaphor, isn't it? The man who grasped the secrets of the cosmos, whose mind transcended all these boundaries, he couldn't manage the basic material demands of the surface world.
Absolutely. His bust now rests modestly in the Cincinnati Public Library, where he often studied and suffered in silence. His entire life just embodies that core tension that Lloyd explores in Etidorhpa, this immense conflict between pure intellectual or spiritual pursuit and the overwhelming, distracting struggle for material survival. Okay, let's turn to the vessel for this philosophy, the narrator himself, Llewellyn Drury. Even his full name suggests a destiny beyond the mundane. Johannes Llewellyn Llangollen Drury.
That's a mouthful.
It is. And he was named Llewellyn in honor of his mother's father, a Dr. Evan Llewellyn, who interestingly was an author of rare occult works.
So that hereditary link to mysticism is established right in his name. It's no surprise that this predisposed him to gather this singular library of books on the most abstruse and occult subjects, but this deep dive into esoteric knowledge, it didn't bring him peace.
No, it triggered a major psychological collapse.
It really did. He describes a mental crisis that sounds profoundly modern, almost like an existential breakdown.
Oh, yeah.
He was overcome by this deep sense of dissatisfaction and restlessness, reaching what he called an insufferable state of mental misery.
And what stands out is his sense of conscious dual existence. He felt like two separate people. He even says he would argue aloud with his other self.
He literally thought he was going mad. He recounts how this internal argument progressed until he questioned his own sanity, observing himself as though he were just watching the common path to insanity unfold. And this is a critical point. Lloyd, the scientist, is framing the acquisition of this spiritual or occult knowledge not as some peaceful enlightenment, but as a dangerous process that can shatter the material mind.
And his mental state wasn't arbitrary. It was catalyzed by his involvement in a secret society.
Yes, a fraternity of adepts, as they called it, devoted to esoteric literature, the ancient wisdom that the burgeoning materialist science of the 19th century had so vehemently rejected. They claimed to follow the guidance of the thrice-famous Hermes.
A reference to Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary figure associated with alchemy and occult philosophy.
Exactly. And that's a fascinating detail because we often think of these groups as these shadowy, homogeneous organizations. But the membership of this brotherhood was surprisingly diverse. It crossed all social boundaries.
Who was in it?
It included statesmen, clergy, lawyers, and even other scientists, all of whom tactfully concealed their association to protect their public standing.
They were essentially the counterculture to the scientific revolution.
They absolutely were. Their goal was profound. They were seeking the highest achievements possible, things like the magnum opus, the great work, often interpreted as spiritual transcendence or the elixir of life or the philosopher's stone.
So their inner consciousness was rebelling against the narrow, reductionist limits of the observable material science of their day.
Precisely. And Drury was admitted to their sacred mysteries, and he took a binding oath of secrecy regarding this precious wisdom, but he consciously and deliberately broke it.
Why?
He believed it was his moral duty to humanity to spread the knowledge.
And that choice brings immediate, frightening consequences. It just raises this critical question. Given how grounded Lloyd was in pharmacology and observation, how does he reconcile this idea of an extreme mental crisis leading to a physical quest guided by a mystical figure? Is he challenging the 19th century medical diagnosis of madness?
It certainly seems that way. The guide doesn't materialize gently. He appears abruptly and claims Drury challenged him to appear, even though Drury couldn't consciously recall ever issuing the challenge. The guide is immediately intimidating.
Right. He demonstrates powers that just defy physics.
This demonstration is a spectacular scene. The guide swiftly passes a knife twice through a solid door handle without touching it. It's a pure occult show of force, just showing his mastery over matter.
And the guide himself is described as being suspended and having no charge defined, like a figure just floating, untethered by gravity or any known forces.
Yeah.
And the guide doesn't offer Drury a choice about whether to publish the secrets eventually, only about the path forward. Drury broke his oath, and now he's been sentenced. You sowed, and thus you will reap.
So his punishment is that he must now undergo these intense physical trials and mental suffering to gain unexpected knowledge. And this is the key part. He is ordered to make his discoveries public in the future.
Wait, so he breaks his oath to publish, and the consequence isn't silence, it's that he's forced to publish later.
Exactly. But only after 30 years of mandated suffering and transformation. It suggests the guide, or whatever he represents, wasn't against the publication of truth. He was against the premature publication driven by an impatient, selfish, and mentally unstable man. The knowledge has to be earned and understood before it can be shared.
And the terrible alternative he's offered is stark. Path A, the asylum, where he'd face prison and submission, basically confinement by the very materialist world he rejected.
Or Path B, a journey to an unknown region beyond the boundaries of any known country, which promises liberation of the soul and development of faculties.
Drury chooses the journey, of course. He loses all interest in his previous life. He takes a solemn oath to keep the rest of this new experience secret until 30 years have passed, fulfilling the guide's required period of silence and transformation.
It's a fantastic setup. The scientist driven mad by metaphysical study is forced into a physical quest to achieve the spiritual knowledge he was trying to leak out prematurely.
So now the adventure begins, and this is where Lloyd really starts to merge his scientific background with all this occult speculation. The descent starts in a massive, gigantic, funnel-shaped cavern sinkhole.
And it's heavily hinted to be in Kentucky, near obscure but real-life locations like Moxley's Landing, Hamletsburg, and Livius.
The location matters, right? Because Kentucky is famous for its karst geology, its enormous cave system.
Exactly. Lloyd is grounding his fantasy in a very real, scientifically observed geographical phenomenon. The entrance to the underworld is a giant sinkhole. It's plausible, in a way.
The first phenomenon they encounter deep underground is the atmosphere itself. As they travel through these dark caves, the air contains an active gaseous essence that provides vital strength. This isn't just breathable air, it's like a supercharged atmosphere.
And this essence is so potent that it completely sustains life and eliminates hunger and thirst. It replaces the need for food and drink. The guide notes that this contributes directly to their conservation. It's an environment so perfectly pure and balanced that it negates the base necessities of surface life.
Which immediately supports the guide's later philosophical argument that the surface world requires too much dedication to merely physical survival.
Right. And Drury, ever the skeptical scientist, is constantly challenging the guide, particularly on the fundamentals of physics. The guide immediately targets the accepted Newtonian theory of gravitation. This is radical for 1896.
It's a really radical departure. The guide argues that gravity isn't constant throughout the Earth's interior. He states that the force of gravitation reaches a maximum at a specific point, about 1/6 of the distance toward the Earth's center.
So, if the Earth's radius is roughly 4,000 miles, the maximum gravity would occur at about 660 miles down. Then, according to the guide, gravity diminishes steadily until matter becomes effectively weightless at the very center of the planet.
This is a complex speculative theory, one that supports the idea of an interior sphere where known physics just cease to apply. The implication is profound.
It is. If gravity diminishes, the interior isn't a crushingly dense, solid core, but maybe a sphere of low-density matter or even a void. It makes the hollow Earth concept seem plausible, though Lloyd's version seems more like a set of vast, low-gravity caverns than a completely empty sphere.
And the guide extends this critique to the accepted definition of energy and force, targeting what 19th century scientists termed imponderable bodies.
Right, things that cannot be measured by weight. For a long time, heat, light, magnetism, electricity, and galvanism were often considered actual substances or fluids that flowed through things, the imponderable bodies.
But the guide dismisses this completely. He says they are not actual substances, but merely modifications of force.
And then he refines the definition even further, saying they are more accurately perturbations of some yet unknown fundamental essence.
That is a stunning concept. It's basically predicting the future of physics. To call these energies perturbations, disturbances, or variations in a field is remarkably close to how we understand field theory and wave mechanics today.
It suggests that there is one universal, fundamental essence, and everything else is just a ripple in it.
And Professor Vaughan, in his earlier scattered papers, he echoes this deeply philosophical view. He believed gravitation was the only permanent and ever-present expression of omnipotence on Earth, unlike the fluctuating nature of heat and electricity. Gravity is the bedrock. Everything else, the perturbations, are fleeting and subject to change.
The journey then takes them dramatically deeper, about 150 miles below the surface, where they encounter a physical impossibility, a vast, dark, underground lake.
A lake that's thousands of square miles in area and 5 miles deep, existing in a realm where, according to our physics, pressure and heat should make a body of water like that impossible.
And they cross this enormous inland sea in a mysterious, non-conventional boat. It moves at what Drury calls vertiginous speed, many kilometers per minute, and it leaves this luminous wake.
That speed is terrifying. And it brings up a classic real-world scientific objection that Drury immediately poses to his guide. If we're moving this fast, why doesn't the boat heat up and burn like a meteor traveling through the atmosphere?
Yeah, friction should turn it into a fireball.
The guide's response is a beautiful piece of speculative physics. He says a protective layer radiates from the boat's prow like a pane of glass. This layer intercepts and dissipates the forces causing friction, which prevents the heat buildup.
This concept is incredibly forward-thinking. Think about modern concepts like magnetic shielding, or even the theoretical possibility of warping space around an object to eliminate resistance. The guide is suggesting that this harnessed force allows for a mode of locomotion that humanity on the surface will eventually achieve naturally for ocean and land travel, a way to move without resistance.
And this subterranean lake is far more than just scenery. It's the engine of global cataclysms. The guide reveals it's the true source of volcanic eruptions, and he even cites Monte Epomeo as a specific example.
The chemical explanation Lloyd provides here is fascinating, and it relies on real chemical principles. The source of the volcanism happens when the water from the lake overflows its containment barrier and hits metallic bases of salt massed in the crust below.
He's referring to the fact that elemental alkali metals like sodium or potassium are highly reactive with water.
Exactly. If you drop pure elemental sodium or potassium into water, the reaction is instantaneous, it's violent, and it's highly exothermic. It releases intense heat.
So this chemical reaction results in the immediate dissociation of water into superheated steam and explosive gases, probably hydrogen.
And these highly compressed, rapidly forming gases need an outlet. They don't erupt back through the relatively contained Kentucky entrance because they naturally follow the line of least resistance, which is a vast channel leading to a distant volcano crater like Epomeo.
So this simple, violent chemical reaction water reacting with elemental metallic bases is cited as the natural cause for more than just volcanoes.
Yes. This same process, where water and its vapor acts upon metallic dust beneath the surface, is also credited with causing earthquakes, geysers, mud springs, and even the formation of mountains through the buckling of the crust. It's a single, unified theory of terrestrial violence driven by fundamental, high-pressure chemistry just beneath the crust. A brilliant way to unify all these seemingly disparate geological phenomena under a single mechanism.
So we transition now from explosive physics to the strange, stable interior world itself, and we begin with a truly unique subterranean ecology, the fungi forest. They pass through these vast, ancient caverns covering thousands of miles, host to gigantic fungi.
The description of this environment is key to understanding the prophecy that comes later. These mushrooms are thousands of years old and are still growing peacefully. They exist in an atmosphere of dead nitrogen and vapor nitrogen being inert, and they are never disturbed by breezes.
They're just balanced on these succulent pedestal-like stalks with roots embedded in carbonates and minerals. They have virtually unlimited stable nutrition and are never exposed to the destabilizing forces of the surface.
Right. And critically, they serve as the food of man. The fungi provide a nutritious food called a papa that is ready for consumption. It's already seasoned and salted. The guide points out that this food occupies an intermediate position between animal and vegetable life, suggesting a perfect synthesized form of sustenance.
But this is more than just exotic food for the travelers. It's a prophecy for the future of humanity.
Yes, it is. The guide reveals that these ever-growing stocks are being accumulated for a future day of necessity. He makes a remarkable prediction for 1896, that humanity, facing inexorable climate change on the surface, just as has already occurred on frozen planets, will eventually be forced to migrate inward to the salubrious inner sphere.
And these fungi will be there to sustain them.
That is just astonishing foresight for a work of speculative fiction from that era. We have to pause on that. A warning about climate change forcing subterranean migration, presented in 1896.
It's incredible. And it connects back to the instability of the surface world. The guide explicitly draws this sharp contrast between this deep earth food and surface fungi.
He does. Surface fungi grow and die quickly, and they often become poisonous because they're exposed to solar pulsations and rapid decay cycles. But these deep earth fungi are all edible, reflecting the purity of their environment.
He even gives a clear chemical analogy, noting that if the fungi spores were taken to the surface, they would immediately degenerate and become virulent or poisonous, just as a potato exposed to sunlight turns green and poisonous due to chemical changes.
The purity and stability of the internal environment are essential for the purity of the organism. And this emphasis on the purity of the inner world sets the stage for the book's greatest moral reckoning, the cavern of the grotesque.
Drury is shown a truly horrifying vision, an infinity of monstrous, distorted, petrified figures. This isn't some arbitrary collection of monsters. These are physical manifestations of spiritual corruption. Every single exaggerated organ reflects the controlling vice within the spirit of the person it once was.
The visual details are terrifyingly vivid. He sees figures with a gigantic forehead on a shrunken body, representing a massive intellect divorced from morality or action.
Others have enormous, dragging feet attached to a child's body with a man's face, illustrating a life defined by base, unthinking movement.
It's pure nightmare fuel. And the guide singles out one figure to hammer the moral point home: a former intelligent man who lost his body and enslaved his soul entirely through drink. He is now trapped in stone with one single unquenchable desire: to drink. This, the guide says, is the eternity of the drunkard.
The guide delivers a chilling lesson here, and it speaks directly to Lloyd's pharmacological background. He explains that a vicious spirit gradually impresses itself onto the material body, creating a vile physiognomy.
He says that if you could see the mental configuration of a drunkard on the surface, their mental image would be a monstrosity as grotesque as the physical forms petrified in this cavern.
It's a powerful, anti-intoxicant message delivered with maximum visual horror. The guide states plainly that any stimulant or narcotic is a demon that destroys its victim by subjugating the higher spiritual self to a lower animalistic craving.
But the timing of the experience is what is truly mind-bending. Drury had a momentary lapse earlier, he attempted to use an intoxicant, and the guide reveals that Drury's entire perceived experience of suffering, pleasure, and eternity in that moment occurred in the single, fleeting second between the cup touching his lips and his falling to his knees.
His eternity began and ended in an instant of choice.
Exactly, proving the immediate and destructive power of the substance on the spiritual self.
Having endured the horrific, grotesque allegories of vice, Drury is then presented with the ultimate contrast and temptation: Etidorhpa.
Right, the name at the heart of the book. And as we mentioned for you listening, the name Etidorhpa is Aphrodite, spelled backward.
Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of carnal, physical love and beauty.
Therefore, Etidorhpa represents the ultimate spiritual antithesis. Pure spiritual love, presented right after he has endured the horrors of pure material vice. The duality is explicit.
He's surrounded by forms of marvelous beauty, ethereal, symmetrical beings who sing enchantingly. Etidorhpa herself approaches, radiant, agile, and slender.
And the description is almost impossible to grasp, suggesting a beauty that transcends physical, material limits. Her fragrance is beyond description, more than the essence of a wild rose, ambergris, and the finest aromatics combined. Even her hair is described as being colorless because they cannot be represented by colors known to mortals.
She is the non-material ideal.
Yes, and she delivers the final critical test. She tells him he cannot enter her spiritual land until he has fully suffered and resisted the tempter, enduring unspeakable thirst, heat, and cold. He must prove his spiritual mastery.
Yet, in the immediate presence of this pure spiritual ideal, he fails. Almost instantly. This is the tragic flaw of the human spirit.
He's presented with a cup of green liquid, and Etidorhpa says, "If you wish, for he who loves shall be loved."
Forgetting her recent warning, forgetting the lesson of the grotesque cavern, he just raises the cup to his lips and takes a sip. He breaks the final test.
He proves his spiritual instability and his reliance on material comfort and immediate gratification. Fortunately, the guide rescues him from the eternal consequence, which would presumably be a fate worse than the eternity of the drunkard. But the lapse demonstrates the profound difficulty of achieving true spiritual transcendence while you're still burdened by a material body and conditioned by material vice.
Having failed the final moral test, the journey continues, and it shifts into this heavy philosophical critique of contemporary science. This intellectual challenge seems designed to humble Drury by showing him the limits of his empirical knowledge.
This is Lloyd using the guide as his philosophical mouthpiece to critique his own field, and the core argument is powerful and simple. Surface science focuses only on description, not on the fundamental why.
Science can tell you what happens, but not why the rules are the way they are.
Exactly. The guide throws out these simple questions that 19th century science found impossible to answer. Why does the robin hop and the snipe walk? How does the tree frog change color instantly? These are just observations of nature that defy simple reductionist explanation.
He digs deeper, right into Lloyd's specialty, chemistry and botany. He asks why the maple tree secretes sweet, healthy sap, while the belladonna, the deadly nightshade growing in the exact same soil, absorbing the exact same elements in sunlight, is mortal poison.
Right. Science can break down the chemistry of the poison and the sugar, but it can't explain the root, why the living system of one plant adheres to the rule of life and the other adheres to the rule of death, despite having identical external resources.
The guide insists that the word why is what drives investigation into the depths, into the true laws of nature. But scientists, unable to answer the why, simply ignore it and focus only on the how and the what, contenting themselves with mere classification and measurement.
He also radically challenges the definition of matter and energy. The guide questions the scientific reliance on terms like density to explain why gold is heavy and aluminum is light. He just dismisses this as descriptive, not explanatory.
And here's the truly radical concept regarding nourishment, which ties back to the fungi forest. The guide asserts that matter is not food itself, but merely a vehicle for food.
The true nourishment is the essence, the force, the life principle, not the mass we measure. This completely reverses the materialistic view of survival.
This feeds directly into the guide's philosophical conclusion about the limitations of surface life. He argues that the Earth's crust is subject to constant solar pulsations and severe atmospheric changes: heat, cold, wind, storms.
And this constant external instability forces man's spiritual self to dedicate virtually all its energy to just preserving the terrestrial body. The spiritual self is distracted and exhausted, simply trying to keep the physical self alive against unstable nature.
This creates what the guide calls the materialistic conflict. Man's spiritual self is obscured and frustrated by an overwhelming material war for existence, which prioritizes the animal instinct, hunger, shelter, fear, reproduction over the spiritual self.
The constant struggle for survival against the unstable external environment prevents superior spiritual evolution. That's the core of it.
And to make the case that pure, amoral science is just as dangerous as pure, unbridled vice, the book introduces a terrifying counterpoint to Drury's quest.
Yes, the figure of the insane anatomist.
This character, a person of deep knowledge, was driven to impiety by advanced biological science. He embraced absolute materialism, arguing that life is simply sensation and everything else, soul, spirit, morality, is chimerical or illusory.
He was so committed to this nihilistic materialism that he treated a finely articulated skull as being no better than a marble statue, claiming both were just composed of lime. His pursuit of pure material knowledge just completely eradicated his moral framework.
Seeking the vital forces that he insisted were purely material, the anatomist decides he needs the purest, most unspoiled specimen to begin his experiments. And he chillingly concludes he must begin with a child, with the cold cunning of a madman.
He constructed mechanical tables in a secluded house where no cry could be heard from outside, ready to begin his gruesome dissections. This terrifying detail is critical. It highlights how the path of pure, amoral, material science, devoid of the spiritual why, leads not to higher knowledge, but to monstrous, inhuman acts.
It serves as a stark warning, showing that science and spiritual values are meant to be collaborators, not antagonists. As the source notes, the enthusiastic religious man should be cautious, and the scientist should not fall prey to sarcasm and scorn, for they must help one another find truth. Finally, we reach the epilogue, After 30 years have passed, the mandated period of silence and maturation, Llewellyn Drury breaks the seal and opens the letter allowing him to publish his experience. He provides his own prologue and interludes discussing his transformation and the discussions he had with Professor Vaughan.
And it's important to acknowledge John Uri Lloyd, the actual author and editor, right here at the end. He included notes showing that he willingly excised some touching passages at the suggestion of a Professor Venable, as they did not conform to the book's general delicacy.
So even in this bizarre, boundary-breaking work, Lloyd was still conscious of his reputation and the need to present the work with dignity.
Absolutely. And Drury, reflecting on the entire ordeal, leaves the final judgment entirely to you, the reader. He admits that whether the book is pure fiction, prophecy, delusion, or a combination of metaphysics, entertaining arguments, scientific problems, and useful reasoning is for the reader to determine.
And that ambiguity is the book's greatest strength.
It is.
So what does this all mean, taking these hundreds of pages of fascinating nuggets and combining them? At its core, Etidorhpa presents a powerful, unresolvable contrast between John Uri Lloyd's established empirical scientific world and the extreme occult philosophy and speculative physics encountered in the inner world.
It's a book defined by relentless dualities, isn't it? The visible versus the invisible, the gross matter versus the subtle spirit, description versus explanation, the what versus the why. The narrative forces you to consider whether this journey is a literal description of a physical, albeit unseen, reality,
Or a complex, multi-layered allegorical vision of the soul's development.
right. We have to ask, is this fundamentally a veiled religious allegory, much like Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress?
Is the entire descent simply a metaphor depicting the struggle of the soul against temptation, with the cavern of the grotesque representing the vanities of life, and Etidorhpa, the reversal of carnal Aphrodite, representing the goal of pure spiritual love?
Or, conversely, is it a stunning prophecy about future scientific breakthroughs? Think about the prediction of mass migration due to climate change, the idea of harnessing a force for non-friction travel, or that revolutionary concept of light and heat as non-substance perturbations. Lloyd frames it as scientifically viable, just ahead of its time.
The ultimate, resounding theme seems to be the critique of materialistic skepticism. The scientific enthusiast is deemed to obstruct the mind of the student if they only accept what is quantifiable and measurable.
Yeah, the true charm of the book, as noted by critics at the time, is found in the space between the lines. The ideas that only the initiated, or perhaps just the highly curious, can fully comprehend.
And this brings us back to the final provocative thought offered by the guide, which challenges our modern scientific certainty. The guide claimed that the occult, the hidden knowledge, is not supernatural.
It is simply governed by natural laws that humans have yet to understand. A miracle, he argued, ceases to be a miracle once the scientific cause is fully comprehended.
We saw the 19th century transition from defining forces like heat and light as imponderable bodies to defining them as modifications of force, and the guide insisted they would eventually be understood merely as perturbations in a fundamental field.
So if the scientific world is constantly changing its understanding of fundamental energy and reality, if what we think is fixed is always evolving, what fundamental concepts do we accept as immovable truth today that future generations will laugh at?
What modern settled science is merely a description, waiting for the proper spiritual or philosophical context to reveal its true underlying why.
It proves that even the most absurd speculations of the past might hold a crucial grain of scientific truth, just waiting for the right conditions to reveal themselves.
That's something to chew on as you contemplate the end of the earth, or perhaps just the beginning of what lies beneath it. Thank you for diving deep with us into the strange world of Etidorhpa.